Welcome to the Sociopia. Today, we're diving deep into Chapter 4 for Class 11, Introducing Western Sociologists. We're going to meet some brilliant and, sometimes controversial minds who literally built the foundations of how we understand society today. And trust me, this isn't just a history lesson. It's like getting a toolkit to analyze the world around you right now. So let's get started.
So, here's the game plan. First, we'll take a look at the wild, chaotic world that even made sociology a thing. Then we'll get into our three heavy hitters. Karl Marx, who saw history as one big story of conflict, Émile Durkheim, who was obsessed with what holds us all together, and finally, Max Weber, who zoomed in on why we do what we do and the rise of massive systems.
All right, let's jump into our first section, the birth of sociology. Before we can really appreciate what these guys had to say, we have to get a feel for the world they were living in. They weren't just writing this stuff in a quiet library. They were right in the middle of some of the most dramatic, earth-shaking changes in human history.
And those changes? They were kicked off by three massive revolutions that turned everything upside down. First, you have the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, where science and individual thinking started to trump old traditions. Then, bam, the French Revolution hit the scene, the Age of Rights, shouting about liberty and equality for all. And on top of all that, the Industrial Revolution, the age of machines, came along and literally ripped people from their farms and threw them into cities and factories, completely changing how people lived and worked.
So just try to imagine the impact of all that happening at once. Cities were exploding in size, poverty was everywhere, and everything people once believed about family, religion, and community was starting to crumble. The old ways of explaining the world just didn't cut it anymore. People needed a fresh, scientific way to figure out this new industrial society. And right out of that urgent need, sociology was born.
Okay, let's get into our first foundational thinker, Karl Marx. Now, for Marx, if you really wanted to understand a society, you didn't look for what was peaceful or orderly. No, you looked for the conflict, the struggle that was always bubbling just under the surface.
This one quote, it basically captures his entire worldview. For Marx, history wasn't about great kings or fancy ideas. It was the ongoing story of conflict between different economic classes. Think masters and slaves, lords and serfs, and in his own time, the factory owners and the workers. This struggle, he said, is the real engine that makes history move forward.
And to explain this, Marx came up with this idea of the mode of production. A simple way to think about it is like a building. The base is the foundation. That's the economy, how things are made, who owns what. And then everything else, the superstructure, which is all our laws, our politics, our culture, even our families, is built on top of that economic foundation. And it's shaped by it, too.
In the capitalist world that Marx was looking at, he saw this struggle playing out between two major groups. On one side, you have the bourgeoisie, the capitalists. These are the people who own the means of production, the factories, the land, the money. And on the other side, you have the proletariat, the working class. They don't own any of that stuff. The only thing they own is their ability to work, which they have to sell to the owners just to survive. For Marx, this whole setup was fundamentally based on exploitation.
All right, let's switch gears and move on to our next big thinker, Émile Durkheim. Now, if Marx was focused on all the forces tearing society apart, Durkheim was fascinated by the complete opposite question. What are the invisible forces that actually hold society together?
This was his big question, the one that drove all of his work. In a world that was becoming more and more about the individual, what stops us from just flying apart into a bunch of separate, self-interested people? What's the social glue that actually binds us to each other?
Durkheim's answer to that question was this really cool concept he called social facts. Think of them as the unwritten rules, the shared beliefs, the moral codes that exist outside of any single one of us, but have this powerful force over us. They're external, but they totally shape our internal behavior. I mean, think about the language you speak or the money you use. You didn't invent them, right? But they structure almost every part of your life. This slide lays out the two kinds of social glue that Durkheim identified. In older, simpler societies, you had what he called mechanical solidarity. People stuck together because they were all pretty much the same. They did the same work, had the same beliefs, lived the same way. But in our complex modern societies, we have organic solidarity. We're held together because we're all different. We're specialized. A doctor needs a farmer needs an engineer needs a teacher. It's this whole web of interdependence that keeps us all connected.
All right, time for our final foundational thinker, the amazing Max Weber. So if Marx was looking at the big economic picture and Durkheim was looking at collective forces, Weber kind of zoomed in. He wanted to understand the individual, specifically the meanings that people attach to the things they do.
His approach is called interpretive sociology. Weber basically argued that you can't just watch what people do from the outside and think you get it. You have to understand things from their point of view. You need to achieve what he called Verstehen. It's a German word that means a deep, empathetic kind of understanding. It's all about trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes to really grasp why they do what they do.
Weber was also super interested in power, and he identified three main types of legitimate authority. First, you have traditional authority, which people obey simply because, well, that's how it's always been done, like with a king or queen. Then there's charismatic authority, which is based on the incredible, magnetic personality of a single leader. And finally, you have rational legal authority, which is based on a system of fair, impartial rules and laws. And Weber noticed that this last one was starting to take over modern life.
And the ultimate example of that rational legal authority is modern bureaucracy. It's like a giant organizational machine. It's built on a clear hierarchy, it runs on written documents and files, it follows a strict set of fixed rules, and it's staffed by qualified officials. For Weber, this incredibly efficient, impersonal system was becoming the defining feature of pretty much everything: the government, big business, even our daily lives.
So let's just pull this all together for a second. What we have here are three incredibly powerful but very different ways of looking at the modern world. Karl Marx saw it as a battleground for class conflict, a system of exploitation that was destined for revolution. Émile Durkheim saw it as a society figuring out a new way to stick together, shifting from mechanical to organic bonds. And Max Weber saw it as a world becoming more and more rationalized, defined by individual actions and the unstoppable rise of bureaucracy.
And that's our deep dive into the foundational thinkers of sociology. Now, if you want detailed notes for this chapter, you can find them on our Telegram channel. The link is right there for you in the description of this explainer. Thanks for tuning in.